There is a specific moment that everyone knows but no one admits. It is that instant right after an outburst, when the harsh words have already left your mouth, when the shout has echoed through the room, when your fist has hit the table. A moment of absolute silence, where time seems suspended and something indefinable breaks in the air. It's not just the embarrassment that hurts, it's something much deeper. It's the sudden realization that, in front of everyone present, we have just revealed our most humiliating truth. We don't even control ourselves. People's gaze changes. There is no longer the respect we had before, that indefinable quality that made us feel dignified, trustworthy, solid. Instead, something emerges that corrodes us from within. Pity mixed with fear. Pity for someone who can't control themselves. Fear of someone unpredictable. But never, ever respect. And then comes the comforting narrative that our era offers as a balm. It's human to feel. You are being authentic. Repressing emotions is bad for you. Sweet words that try to transform our weakness into virtue. Our lack of control into emotional honesty. Our society has created a whole discourse that celebrates outbursts, romanticizes lack of control, and transforms the inability to govern oneself into a sign of depth. But there is a truth that our emotionalized society refuses to face. A truth that Nietzsche understood with brutal clarity. Those who do not govern themselves do not deserve to govern anything. And those who live at the mercy of their own inner storms are condemned to a small, predictable, manipulable existence. Because there is a huge difference between feeling deeply and being a slave to what you feel. Between having intense emotions and being possessed by them. Between being human and being a hostage to your own humanity. Between choosing how to react and being carried away by every impulse that arises. This is not a conversation about repressing feelings or becoming a robotic version of yourself. It is about something infinitely more necessary and dangerous. How to transform the chaos that dwells within each of us into genuine power. How to stop being sculpted by our own emotions and start sculpting them. How to regain lost sovereignty over our own inner realm. Because perhaps the real problem is not feeling too much. The real problem may be having completely lost the ability to command what happens within us. Our era has created one of the most seductive lies in human history. A lie so well crafted that it has been sold as liberation, empowerment, evolution. The lie that being emotional is being authentic. We walk the streets carrying this belief like a sacred amulet. I am an intense person. I feel everything very deeply. I don't repress anything. As if emotional intensity were a medal of honor, a testament to human depth, proof that we are more real than others. There is a whole language we have learned to use to justify our lack of control. I need to express what I feel. I can't be false to myself. At least I'm transparent. And when someone questions an outburst, a disproportionate reaction, a moment of total lack of control, the answer comes automatically. Would you rather I lie? That I hide who I really am? And when we explode, when we yell at our partner in a trivial argument, when we cry uncontrollably in a work meeting, when our voice trembles with anger at the slightest provocation, when we curse in traffic as if our life depended on it, there is always a ready excuse. At least I'm genuine. At least I'm not fake like those people who hide everything. But notice what happens next. Notice the eyes of the people around you. Is there admiration there? Is there respect? Or is there something very different? A mixture of discomfort, pity, and even more painful, a sudden distance. People start tiptoeing around those who are too emotional. They start avoiding certain topics, certain provocations, certain conversations. Because there is something that everyone instinctively perceives, even without being able to name it. Those who do not control their own emotions are declaring to the world that anyone can control them. They are wearing an invisible sign on their chest. Here are my emotional buttons. Press them whenever you want. And this is terrifying for those around them, because it means living with someone who is completely predictable in their unpredictability. Modern culture has turned this vulnerability into a virtue. It has created a cult of emotional outbursts, of truth of feelings, of total exposure of the soul. It has turned therapy into a philosophy of life, taken concepts about the importance of recognizing emotions and distorted them into a dangerous belief that every emotion must be immediately expressed without filters, without consideration for context or consequences. And millions of intelligent, sensitive, well-intentioned people embraced this narrative because it offered something irresistible. Permission to stop fighting themselves. Permission to be small disguised as greatness. Permission to live on autopilot disguised as consciousness. We have created an entire generation that confuses emotional maturity with immaturity disguised as honesty. That confuses depth with an inability to control oneself. That confuses being human with being a slave to one's own humanity. A generation that sincerely believes that shouting is being true, that exploding is being brave, that losing control is being authentic. But Nietzsche knew something that our era has forgotten. He knew that there is a huge difference between feeling and being felt, between having emotions and being possessed by them, between expressing authenticity and being enslaved by impulses. For him, what our culture calls emotional authenticity was just another form of slavery, a more subtle, more socially acceptable slavery, but equally destructive to the human spirit. For him, true authenticity was not in uncontrolled explosion, but in the sovereign ability to choose when to feel, how to feel, when to express, when to contain, to choose to be the conductor of one's own emotional symphony, not just an instrument played by external forces. Real authenticity was sovereignty over oneself. It was the ability to use emotions as refined instruments, not to be used by them as a puppet. And here lies the profound tragedy of our age. We confuse liberation with emotional licentiousness. We confuse evolution with regression to a primitive state where impulses rule reason. We sell as human progress what is in fact a return to the animal state, where reaction replaces conscious action, where instinct slaughters intelligence. How many brilliant, talented, loving people have missed opportunities that will never return because they believed that exploding was being true? How many promising careers have been destroyed by a moment of emotional honesty at a crucial meeting? How many relationships that could have lasted for decades ended not because of a lack of love, but because of an excess of uncontrolled authenticity? How many precious friendships have been lost because someone decided that telling the truth was more important than considering the moment, the context, the necessary delicacy? The most painful thing is that many of these people, in the silence of the early morning, know. They know that there is something deeply wrong with this equation. They know that, despite all the authenticity, they are losing something essential in life. The ability to inspire genuine trust, to command natural respect, to positively influence the world around them. Because no one fully trusts someone who does not trust themselves. And how can you trust yourself when you have no control over your own reactions? How can you respect yourself when you live like a boat without an anchor, drifting on emotional seas? How can you lead others when you can't even lead your own most basic impulses? The truth that our emotional culture refuses to face is simple and brutal. Respect is not earned through outbursts. Admiration does not arise from lack of control. Authority is not built on poorly managed inner storms. Leadership does not emerge from emotional chaos, however authentic that chaos may seem to those who experience it. But then, does that mean we should become emotional robots? Does it mean that the way forward is to stifle everything, repress everything, become a cold and calculating version of ourselves? What exactly did Nietzsche see when he spoke of emotional control? Within every human being there is a wild realm, a territory where primitive forces roam like ferocious animals, where storms form without warning, where emotional earthquakes can devastate everything in seconds. Nietzsche looked at this inner chaos not with horror, but with fascination. For him, these were not imperfections to be eliminated. They were raw powers waiting for a master. Imagine anger as a dragon sleeping in your chest. Most of the time it rests silently, almost imperceptibly. But one wrong word, one gesture of contempt, one perceived injustice is enough to awaken the creature. The heart races, the blood boils, the fists clench instinctively. It is as if something ancestral, pre-civilizational, takes over the entire body. And at that crucial moment, two things can happen. Either the dragon leaves the cave and devastates everything around it, the conversation turns into shouting, words become weapons, relationships are set ablaze, or someone stands firm at the cave's entrance, recognizes the creature's strength, but decides when and how it can manifest itself. Most people experience the first scenario repeatedly. The dragon emerges, causes destruction, and then comes regret, justification, rationalization. I didn't mean to say that. I don't know what came over me. He provoked me, as if they were victims of something external, when in fact they were overwhelmed by something that dwells within themselves. But there is something even more disturbing about this dynamic. When someone repeatedly loses control, the people around them begin to map these outbursts. They begin to identify the triggers, the patterns, the signs that the storm is coming. And then something terrible happens. That person becomes completely predictable in their unpredictability. The boss knows exactly what words to use to destabilize the explosive employee. The romantic partner knows which buttons to push to provoke a reaction. Friends begin to walk on eggshells, avoiding certain topics, certain jokes, certain truths. And the most ironic thing, the one who believed they were being authentic becomes the most manipulable of all. Because Nietzsche had a brutal understanding of power. Those who do not master their own internal forces are destined to be dominated by others. It is impossible to respect someone who lives at the mercy of their own emotions, just as it is impossible to respect a king who cannot rule his own kingdom. Fear operates in an equally devastating way, but with a different cruelty. It arises like a cold fog that paralyzes the limbs, makes the voice tremble, and causes the gaze to flee. And when someone allows themselves to be ruled by fear, they lose not only opportunities, they lose their very dignity. They become small in the face of life, avoiding necessary risks, fleeing difficult conversations, accepting less than they deserve. Observe how fear manifests itself in modern life. The person who never asks for a raise because they are afraid of rejection. The individual who remains in toxic relationships because they are afraid of loneliness. The one who does not pursue their dreams because they are afraid of failure. Fear is not just an emotion. It is an invisible jailer that keeps millions of people trapped in lives smaller than they could have. Deep sadness has its own kind of tyranny. It arrives like a rain that never stops, drenching everything, making every movement heavy, every thought dark. And when someone drowns in this sadness, they cease to be a person others can count on. They become an emotional black hole that sucks the energy out of everyone around them. But perhaps the most dangerous of all is envy disguised as social justice. That corrosive force that constantly whispers about how others don't deserve what they have, about how unfair the world is, about how we are always victims of circumstance. Envy is the acid that corrodes the soul from within, turning creative potential into destructive resentment. But here is Nietzsche's most disturbing insight. All these forces, anger, fear, sadness, envy, desire, are not enemies in themselves. They carry vital, creative, transformative energy. The problem has never been having these emotions. The problem is being possessed by them. It's like having an arsenal of powerful weapons, but not knowing how to use them. Anger can become unshakable courage when consciously directed. Fear can turn into strategic prudence when properly understood. Sadness can generate compassionate depth when processed wisely. Even envy can be alchemized into inspiration for growth. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this conversation is echoing in familiar territory. Perhaps you recognize your own pattern, your own struggle, your own silent frustration, and that's no coincidence. It's because we all carry these wild forces within us. The question Nietzsche posed was not how to eliminate these inner powers, but how to transform them into instruments of personal power. How to make anger a source of unshakable determination. How to transform fear into strategic wisdom. How to convert sadness into authentic emotional depth. How to alchemize even envy into fuel for personal growth. Because there is a fundamental difference between being driven by emotions and using emotions to drive yourself. Between being a slave to internal forces and being the alchemist who transforms them. Between living by reacting to what arises within us and living by consciously creating from what arises within us. But this requires something that our age has almost completely lost. The understanding that we are responsible not only for what we do, but for what we become. That our personality is not a fixed destiny, but a work of art in constant construction. That we can choose who we are moment by moment, decision by decision. And this is precisely where the most important distinction in Nietzschean philosophy emerges. The difference between two fundamental types of human beings. Those who react to the world and those who act on the world. Those who are shaped by circumstances and those who shape circumstances. There is an invisible line that runs through humanity, a border that separates not the rich from the poor, not the intelligent from the ignorant, not the young from the old, but something much more fundamental. Those who live reacting and those who live acting. The reactive man is like a human thermometer. His internal temperature changes according to his environment. When someone praises him, he burns with pride. When someone criticizes him, he sinks into depression or explodes in rage. When the weather is good, he smiles. When it rains, he becomes despondent. His entire existence is a perpetual response to what happens outside of him. Observe this type of person on any given day. In the morning, they wake up and immediately check their cell phone messages. If there is something positive, the day starts well. If there is something negative, their mood is ruined even before breakfast. In traffic, every honk is a personal offense. At work, every word from the boss is interpreted as approval or rejection. At home, every gesture from their partner determines whether the evening will be good or bad. Reactive people live on a constant emotional roller coaster, but they don't realize that they themselves are building the tracks. They believe that their emotions are natural consequences of external events, when in fact they are unconscious choices that have become automatic habits. They have developed an internal operating system where everything that happens outside determines how they feel inside. This person becomes a slave to 1,000 little daily tyrants. The line at the bank, a colleague's sarcastic comment, the elevator delay, their partner's ambiguous silence. Each micro-event has the power to hijack their emotional state for hours, and they accept this as natural, as inevitable, as being human. And there is something deeply tragic about this existence. The reactive person never creates anything truly original. They are always too busy responding, defending themselves, justifying themselves, adapting. Their vital energy is consumed entirely by the task of reacting to the world, leaving little or nothing for the task of building something of their own. Observe how this manifests itself in practical life. At work, he's always chasing after problems that others have created, always putting out fires, always responding to crises. In relationships, he is always explaining his feelings, always justifying his reactions, always apologizing for his outbursts. In his personal life, he is always adapting to circumstances, always changing plans according to the mood of the moment. Nietzsche saw this type of person as a colossal waste of human potential. Because behind all reactivity, there is a genuine life force being wasted. It is like a powerful river that, instead of moving mills and generating energy, goes around in circles, creating only turbulence. It is talent being burned in the furnace of automatic emotional response. The active man, on the other hand, is like the sun. He generates his own light, his own heat, his own energy. External circumstances may vary, but his internal source remains constant. When provoked, he can choose to ignore it, respond strategically, or use the provocation as fuel for something greater. When praised, he receives it with grace, but does not depend on it to feel valuable. When criticized, he evaluates whether there is anything useful in the criticism and discards the rest. This type of person has a magnetic quality that is difficult to define but impossible to ignore. There is a solidity about them, a reliability, a sense that they will not be easily shaken by the winds of circumstance. And it is this quality that inspires genuine respect in others. People instinctively trust those who demonstrate self-control, because respect at its core is recognition of strength. And strength for Nietzsche was not physical strength or aggression, but the ability to remain centered in oneself regardless of what is happening around. It is the ability to generate one's own values rather than just adopting external values. It is the ability to create rather than just react. The active man observes his own emotions as a scientist observes natural phenomena. He feels anger but asks himself, is this anger useful right now? Does it help me achieve my goals, or does it just satisfy me momentarily? He feels fear but questions, does this fear protect me from real danger, or does it just prevent me from growing? He feels sadness but evaluates, does this sadness have something to teach me, or is it just paralyzing me? And here is the most revolutionary insight. The active man feels no less than the reactive man. In fact, he often feels more deeply, with more nuance. The difference is that he feels consciously, chooses consciously, expresses consciously. His emotions become refined instruments, not uncontrolled hammers. It's like the difference between being swept away by a current and consciously navigating the same river. The water is the same, the force is the same, but the experience is completely different. One is chaos, the other is art. One is survival, the other is creation. But transforming from reactive to active is not a simple or quick process. It requires something that our culture of instant gratification has taught us to despise: inner discipline. It requires the courage to take full responsibility for your emotional life, without blaming circumstances, people, or the past. It requires accepting that, regardless of what happens around you, your internal response is always a choice. And it requires more than anything else what Nietzsche considered the driving force of all human greatness: the will to power. Not power over others, but power over oneself. The power to become who you choose to be, rather than just accepting who you happen to become. The power to sculpt your own soul as an artist sculpts marble. Because in the end, the difference between the reactive and the active man is not talent, intelligence, or luck. It is choice. The fundamental choice to live as the author of your own existence or as a secondary character in the story of others. The choice to command or obey one's emotions. But this choice brings with it a responsibility that many prefer to avoid: the responsibility to govern oneself completely. There is a moment in every human being's life when the mask comes off. Not the social mask we wear for others, but the more intimate one, the mask we wear for ourselves. That's when we stop pretending to be victims of our own emotions and recognize a disturbing truth: we have always been in control. Always. Every outburst of anger that we couldn't control was a choice. Every moment of paralyzing fear that overwhelmed us was a decision. Every plunge into sadness that dragged us down was a conscious surrender disguised as inevitability. The only difference is that these choices were made so quickly, so automatically, that we forgot they were choices. And this discovery is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it means we have power. Terrifying because it means we have total responsibility. There is no one else to blame, no external circumstances to hold accountable, no unchangeable emotional nature to justify our smallness. Nietzsche knew that few have the courage for this revelation. Most prefer the comfortable illusion of being victims of their own emotions, rather than accepting the crushing weight of being fully responsible for them. Because being responsible means there are no more excuses. It means that every moment of lack of control was a choice to abdicate one's own power. But for those who manage to cross this portal of brutal awareness, something extraordinary happens. They discover that controlling emotions is not repressing or denying them. It is transforming them into art. It is like learning to play a complex musical instrument that has always been there, but we never knew how to use. Anger ceases to be a destructive fire and becomes a sacred fire that forges unbreakable determination. Fear ceases to be paralysis and becomes an internal radar that detects where we need to grow. Sadness ceases to be drowning and becomes depth that allows us to understand the pain of others. Each emotion reveals its hidden face, its secret usefulness, its transformative potential, and then something even deeper emerges: respect. Not the forced respect that is demanded of others, but the genuine respect that is quietly earned. People begin to notice something different. There is a solidity, a reliability, a quiet strength that emanates from those who master themselves. It is impossible to define exactly what it is, but everyone feels it. It is the difference between a house built on sand and one built on rock. Both may look similar on the outside, but when storms come, only one remains standing. And people instinctively seek shelter near those who demonstrate this inner stability. Because deep down, we all know how to recognize real strength. Not the theatrical strength of those who shout the loudest or hit the hardest, but the quiet strength of those who remain centered when everything around them is chaos. The strength of those who can maintain clarity when others lose their reason. The strength of those who turn pressure into diamonds instead of letting it create only dust. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this whole journey is discovering that emotional control does not diminish the intensity of life. It increases it. When you no longer need to expend energy reacting automatically to every stimulus, you are left with an incredible amount of vital energy to create, to love deeply, to live with a conscious intensity that few know. It's like the difference between being a drifting boat and being a ship with a direction. The ocean is still vast, the waves are still powerful, but now you sail with purpose. Every storm becomes an opportunity to demonstrate mastery. Every calm becomes a moment of preparation for great voyages. And in the silence of this inner mastery, something emerges that our age has almost completely lost: genuine authority. Not the authority imposed by positions or titles, but the natural authority of those who have proven to themselves that they can govern the most difficult territory of all, their own hearts. This authority does not need to announce itself, does not need to defend itself, does not need to justify itself. It simply is, and in its powerful silence it carries a truth that echoes beyond words. Those who master themselves do not need to master anyone else. Because in the end, the respect we seek so much in others always begins in the same place, in the respect we earn from ourselves. And that respect is only born when we prove, repeatedly, that we are worthy of our own trust, that when we promise something to ourselves, we deliver, that when we decide how we will react, we keep our word. It is in that quiet moment of inner recognition that we understand the deepest truth of all. We didn't need the respect of others to be complete. We needed our own respect, and it was always there waiting for us to have enough courage to deserve it. Where do you feel you most need to regain control of yourself? If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos, you reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the codes of the White Rabbit are ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.